Well,
Thank
good
you, Dori.
afternoon, everybody. Stephen, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I really appreciate it. I have been following along to this incredible seminar that you all have been participating in the last few days, and I'm just blown away by the depth and breadth in which Stephen has created this incredible learning program for you. And I hope to be just another, resource and tool to help improve your instruction when it comes to teaching about anti-Semitism. Mary, I see your question. And so since I'm presenting from the Institute for Curriculum Services, if you don't mind just kind of quickly doing our attendance link, that would be great for it. If not, that's okay too, because I can connect with Stephen, but I just have it up. It's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. But thanks for the questions. Just a little bit of housekeeping before I get started with the actual presentation. So I'm presenting through Zoom from my home, and I can kind of see the Whova chat. So, and I'm going to be asking you to be participatory. So be, just bear with me as we kind of manage and deal with these multiple moving parts. Don't worry about the attendance. I will take care of it and get it from, let me move this off so it doesn't freak anyone out anymore. I'll get the attendance from Stephen. Do not worry. So again, do not worry. That was something from my organization, Institute for Curriculum Services, that we like to do it at our workshops. But again, don't worry about it. I'll meet with Stephen. All right, enough about that. Let's get into this session on history of European anti-Semitism. I'll explain a little bit more about our reasoning behind this particular curriculum and why we developed this to supplement and to support teaching about the Holocaust. And we'll talk more about that in just a moment. But first, what I'd like to do is tell you a little bit more about the Institute for Curriculum Services, who we are, what we do, and how we can continue to further support you in your instructional needs on topics related to Jews, Judaism, Jewish history, and Israel, as Stephen had shared. So again, my name is Dori Gerber. I am an educator with the Institute for Curriculum Services. We are a nonprofit education initiative. We're actually based in San Francisco, California, although I'm actually zooming into you just down the road in Altamont Springs. I was supposed to be there in person, but I am recovering from COVID. So to keep everyone safe, and through the magic of technology, I'm able to still present with you all today and share this with you via technology, Zoom, Whova, whoever, whatnot. So here we are. But again, like I said, and like Stephen mentioned, our mission is dedicated to improving the quality of K through 12 education on topics related to Jews, Judaism, Jewish history, and Israel in the United States. And we do this by developing standards-aligned curricula, okay? So what does that mean? We know across the board, across the country, especially here in Florida, what is being taught, what are the standards being taught when it comes to those topics that I mentioned above. And we help by the suggestion and the request of educators like you all from around the country. We develop resources and professional development on those topics so that you feel confident and comfortable when teaching about them in your classroom, but they're connected to what you're already teaching. And again, we do professional development all over the country. So if anyone here is a curriculum supervisor or wants to share this with their curriculum supervisor, we can do free professional development. Hey, Sanford, I'm so glad that you use this in Palm Beach County. I work with Kim Coombs a lot, so that's amazing. Fantastic. Okay, and ultimately at ICS, we believe that an excellent education is essential to building a strong civil society where all people can flourish. I want to draw your attention to that little logo at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. We are very proud to be a consortium member of the Library of Congress's Teaching with Primary Sources program. This just, I think, highlights our commitment to ensuring that our resources are rooted in primary sources to help students think critically and independently when making meaning about historical and current events. And we're going to talk more about the Library of Congress's tools and what does that mean utilizing primary sources. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. This graphic here shows the variety of topics that we offer through our free resources and professional development. The blue being kind of the subject areas under the social studies, world history umbrella. The maroon being the specific topic titles themselves, of which we offer professional development or free resources and/or free resources on our website. Now, for one other quick thing that I want to share is that we do offer an online course. It is free. It is self-paced at this time. We'll be doing a synchronous option in the fall. But if you have an interest in the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict, this is a fantastic 5-module course that you can complete online. Enrollment is open now and it ends at the end of this month. Just wanted to share that resource with you as well. Okay, what will we be doing in our session today? So we're going to do many different things. We're going to define the term anti-Semitism. I'm sure this is something that maybe you've been talking about throughout the week together. We're going to trace the trajectory of anti-Semitism in European history, and we're going to stop before the Holocaust and before World War II purposefully. So one of the main goals of this session and the reason that we developed this particular curriculum is because we wanted to attempt to answer a very common question that we were getting from teachers that the students are asking, which is, how did the Holocaust even happen, right? So we hope that by exploring over 2,000 years of the evolution of anti-Semitism, you'll have the historical context to help your students begin to answer that question. And I noticed through the poll that I put out, many of you are aware that this is over a several thousand-year-old form of hatred. So we'll dive deeper into that throughout our time together today. We will focus on the complexity and the persistence of anti-Semitism. We will analyze some primary sources related to different time periods during our time together. And with all ICS workshops, you will leave with a link that is connected to a robust collection of tools and resources, including a slide deck for instruction that you can use with your students. Okay? So that's a little bit of an overview of what we're going to be covering today. So if we're focusing on the history of anti-Semitism, then why am I sharing these very modern images with you that you see here on the screen? Well, I think it's really important that we frame our historical conversation with these modern images to remind us, and I'm sure this is something you've been talking about the last several days, that within the last several years, there has just been an uptick. An uptick is a mild word, right? A very large increase in anti-Semitic incidents, both here in the United States and globally, right? There was a report done by the United Nations in 2019 that stated that anti-Semitism expressed through acts of discrimination, intolerance, or violence towards Jews violates a number of human rights, including the right to freedom of religion or belief. So attacks on synagogues, on schools, desecration of Jewish cemeteries, things that you're seeing here in this image, in these images, for example, right, are explicit infringements that interfere with the concrete realities and practices of an individual's religious life. So again, as we begin to investigate the past, I think it's important for us to make connections to what is happening today. Okay. I mentioned to you that ICS is a consortium member of the Library of Congress's Teaching with Primary Sources program. I want to unpack a little bit about them and the tools that they have for you and your students to analyze primary sources. So really quickly, I have a question, and in the Whova chat box, answer Y for yes, N for no. I am familiar with the Library of Congress's Teaching with Primary Sources tools. Y for yes, N for no. Okay, looks like okay, there's a good balance here, but many of you seems like you've not been introduced to the Library of Congress's tools before. So let me take just a moment to kind of step out of the history of European anti-Semitism for a minute and share some tools with you. There will be a direct link to what I'm sharing in the session's resources at the end of the session. But what I want to do is bring your attention to this page in particular on their website, which is the source analysis tool guide. Okay, so a couple of things I want to point out. Notice their strategy for observing primaries or for analyzing primary sources starts with observe, reflect, and question. Okay, notice it's a circle because this kind of learning is not linear, meaning it doesn't start in one place and end in the other. It is ongoing, but oftentimes the first place to start is visually and making those observations. Okay, now, how do we analyze primary sources? There are so many different types of primary sources, more than just documents, and we should be using them all to take our students through history. It's almost like we have a time machine in our possession when we're studying with primary sources. So when you go to their website, you will notice they have analyzing books, charts, manuscripts, maps, all of these that you see here. What does this mean? So let's pretend we're going to analyze a map. When I click on this, what you are now provided with are question prompts. It's really hard for students to grapple with how to analyze primary sources. So they have provided question sets, right, to help with the observation, to help with the reflection and inference making, and to help with deepening and further questioning. I also really like that they have provided extension activities differentiated to your students' level of learning, and you'll see that at the bottom there. So what they've done is they have created question prompts for all of these different types of primary sources. If there's a type that you're working with that's not in that list, I call this one here, this very first one, analyzing primary sources, the generic set list. It will work for any primary source that you're working with, okay? One other thing that I want to show you is because you all have so much that you're dealing with, deciphering your students' handwriting shouldn't be one of them. So they've provided a fillable PDF that you can provide your students with the question sets, whether it's in your learning management system, print it out, however you want to do it. They can respond. Take a look here. I noticed they can type directly into the document, download it, either email it to you, submit it in your learning management system, however that works for you. Again, no need to decipher your students' handwriting anymore. You've got way too much to do. I should point out the National Archives has a great set of question set tools as well, but I wanted to just focus on this right now. Now, I noticed someone said, I wish my students had access to a laptop. Look, we all have that kind of digital resources. That's fine. You can print these out. You can put them in plastic sleeves so your student, you don't have to make tons of copies. print out this source analysis tool and have them write on it and ask them to be kind to your eyes, right? Okay. So we've talked a little bit about the tools. What I want to do now is practice a little bit. And what I'm going to ask you to do, okay, and this is going to be really hard because you've been learning so much this week and you already have a lot of you have a lot of existing knowledge on this topic, right? More so than what your students would have going into this study. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is pretend that you're a student. So I want to practice with you how to do some analyzing with your student on an image that's related to our topic. So yes, we're going to start getting into the meat of things now. Here we go. Okay, so this is an image from the cover of a French publication called La Libre Parole, okay? It was published in October of 1893, okay? And just so you know, if you see at the very bottom of the image there, it says leur patrie in French. That means their homeland. Really quickly, in the chat box, what do we know is happening in France about 1893, 1894? What do we know? Yes, Ryan. Yep, the Dreyfus Affair. Okay, keep that in mind. We're going to come back to the Dreyfus Affair in a little bit, but I'm just providing you a little bit of context for this image. Now, if I were doing this with a group of students, I may not provide them that source information just yet. I might save that after we've done a little bit of the observation. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop talking for a minute, and I want your eyes to take an eye walk. Literally walk over that image with your eyes and be prepared to add to the chat box the things that you see. Notice some of the prompts that are there. Describe what you see. Describe the figure. What details can you see? What is the physical setting? Notice, I am not asking you to make any inferences. I'm not asking you to make any sort of connections, stereotypical connections, anything like that yet. All we are doing is observing. Way to go, Mary. Okay, Mary, I feel like we've met before. All right, go ahead and add to the chat box. What do you see? Nose exaggerated, inhuman features, claws for fingers and toes. There's a round object. I see the sun rising, money, clock. You are doing phenomenal. You are doing exactly what I'm asking. You are literally walking over this and you are making observations. This is exactly what your students would be doing. Tattered clothing, okay? Love it. Now we're gonna move on. And this is where the reflection comes in. This is where your students are gonna make those inferences from the instruction you've been giving them. Okay, and this is where you now can take your foundation of knowledge, right? And give me some historical inferences, context, right? Why the tattered clothing? Why the money? Why the animalistic or inhuman characteristics? Fill that in now. Okay, so we're seeing that this gentleman has a very big exaggerated nose, stereotypical Jewish feature, right? He's clinging to the world, right? Because there's the stereotype of Jews wanting to have world domination. The economic anti-Semitism comes into play. Jews control the money. Jews control the world. Exactly. You're all putting in great comments here. Now again, we're doing this really quickly because I just want to model for you how we would do this with students. What further questions do you have based on our conversation so far and what you're looking at? Okay, what questions come to mind? What questions would you might guide your students to ask? Is the sun setting on a person? Okay, or right there have been conversations, inferences that this is world domination that takes place day and night. Notice there's a moon in the bottom right hand corner, right? Why is this common thinking? Okay, Right. What is the point of this cover? Great. I'm going to stop there because I want to give you another piece of information that you could then share with students. It's more context. So the publisher of this publication, La Libre Parole, was a gentleman named Edward Drummond. And in 1889, he founded the Anti-Semitic League of France. Now, do you have more context as to the reasoning behind the cover, the audience that it was intended to reach, right? So we now have more evidence and more things to discuss. So again, we were just practicing here. A+ to all of you, gold star. And again, there's so much to unpack here. I would encourage you to use this particular primary source. It is shared with you. Now, before we get into further content, okay, I want to unpack some names that you may recognize that are connected to the Jewish people, okay? And it's important as we're going through this historical evolution of anti-Semitism to make these historical name connections as well, okay? So first, let's start with Hebrews, right? The first 3 generations, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, are called Hebrews. It's very interesting when you look to see what the term means. One who crosses over something, right? The next is Israelites. This is a term that comes from the Hebrew Bible, and it's used to relate to this group of people, the children of Israel, until the destruction of the northern kingdom of Israel in 722 BCE. And this term means those who struggle. Now, while broadly describing the people over different points of time, the terms Hebrews and Israelites are ancient terms, like I said, found in the first 5 books of Moses. Neither are appropriate for describing modern day Jews. Okay, so now let's look at the term Jews, right? This is the accurate group name for the Jewish people as an ethnic and religious group from 722 BCE to today. And it's a term that means those who are grateful, okay? Now, Judaism is the monotheistic religion of the Jewish people. While Judaism is the religion of the Jewish people, it's important to point out that not all Jews consider themselves religious or practice Judaism. Okay? And then there is the term Israelis. It is the term for citizens of the modern state of Israel. Okay? Some people use Israeli as a synonym for Jew, but it's inaccurate. Israeli refers to citizenship and includes people of different faiths and ethnicities, just as using the term American does here in the United States, right? So it would be helpful for your students to understand that today, in the 21st century, Hebrew is a language, does not refer to a modern group of people. So using the term Hebrews to describe Jews is in effect out of date, okay? So a little bit of terminology for you, and we're going to focus on one more term to build context for our session today, and that is the term anti-Semitism, hatred, discrimination, fear and prejudice against Jews as individuals or as a group based on age-old stereotypes and myths. It was coined by a German writer named Wilhelm Marr in Germany in 1879. And it was done in contrast to previous centuries when hatred of or prejudice against Jews was anchored in anti-religious conviction, which was called anti-Judaism. Now, Marr used the term anti-Semitism to emphasize a perceived racial inferiority of the Jews. This occurred during a time when the ideas about the biology of race were developing and being used to justify control over a minority populations, both in Europe and in the United States. Okay. Now, the question is, to hyphenate or not, according to Google or your word processor, the answer is actually not. Okay, and they might like to automatically put that hyphen in. This information comes from Deborah Lipstat's book, her most recent one on anti-Semitism. But I want to focus mainly on the second bullet to explain why we should not be putting the hyphen in anti-Semitism, and even really capitalizing the term unless it's the first word of a sentence or in a title. So, as we talked about on that previous slide about the derivation of the term anti-Semitism, it was created to describe anti-Jewish campaigns, right? So the placement of a hyphen after the term anti would indicate that anti-Semitism refers to all Semitic peoples, right? All people who speak Semitic languages like Arabic and Aramaic, as well as Hebrew, right? Those classified as Semites. But we know that that term is solely used to describe and analyze past and present forms of opposition or hatred only towards Jews. So just a little bit of an understanding of why we shouldn't be hyphenating the term. So there are many layers to anti-Semitism that have accumulated over the centuries. Now, scholar William Brustein, he identifies 4 historical forms of anti-Semitism: religious, economic, political, and racial. And we're going to explore these forms as we examine the chronological evolution of anti-Semitism during our conversation today. So let's go way back in time to the Roman Empire, where anti-Judaism was present. So remember, at this time, we have Judaism, a monotheistic religion in a polytheistic world. Jews wouldn't worship Roman gods, and they kept their cultural identity. So they were viewed as outsiders who resisted total Roman rule, and therefore they were denigrated for many of the things that you see here on the screen. Now, the man who Christians refer to as Jesus Christ was born and died as one of the Jewish people. And in his short life on earth, Jesus taught the message of love and how to lead a good life in the tradition of other Jewish teachers. Now, to our knowledge, neither Jesus nor any of his followers left any written records, but what we do have is a set of documents that were written and then collected in the generations after Jesus's death around 30 CE. Now, William Brustein, the scholar that I was pointing out, who kind of identified those four forms of anti-Semitism, he points out, and this is really interesting, that Christians and Jews have a very unique relationship. One that is different than, say, the relationship between Christianity and Hinduism or Islam and Buddhism, because they started out as siblings in Judea, which was a remote province of the Roman Empire. Now, in the second part of the Christian Bible, or the New Testament, the seeds for a religious precursor to anti-Judaism are sown, okay? So the negative depiction of Jews in these texts really reflected an internal debate of Jews who believed that Jesus was the Messiah and traditional Jews who did not view Jesus as sacred, right? And then in time, as more non-Jews or Gentiles came to believe in Jesus, much harder lines are drawn between the two groups, okay? Now, when the Romans destroyed the temple in Jerusalem in 70 CE, many Jews were killed or they were forced to leave the land of Judea. So by the 11th century, small Jewish communities were found throughout Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. Now, most sects of Judaism that had existed were wiped out. Those that remained, like those that were Jesus's followers, were forced to reinvent themselves, which would then usher in the onset of Christianity. And you'll notice through our conversation today that resettlement is a common theme throughout Jewish history. Now, what we know is that Jesus was killed by the Romans, as were countless others that were seen as a threat to Roman rule. But early Christians who were angry that Jews did not believe Jesus was the Son of God and the Messiah, and also wanting the Roman citizens to follow their new Christian religion, taught that the Jews, not the Romans, were to blame for the crucifixion of Christ. And this was a myth that has led to hundreds of years of persecution and was the basis of religious anti-Semitism. Now, since World War II, there have been various Christian denominations that have taken steps to disavow this charge of deicide, right? Or the blaming of Jews for Jesus's death. One example started with the Catholic Church and the Second Vatican Council's Nostra Aetate in 1965. But a more recent example was in 2011 when Pope Benedict explicitly exonerated Jews from all blame for the crucifixion of and the death of Jesus in his book, Jesus of Nazareth. Okay. Now, after the collapse of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE, political power in the Middle Ages became linked to the church. The church controlled all aspects of life, which was seen as preparation for life after death. Anyone that was not a Christian was regarded as an outsider, okay? Now, during the medieval period, right, we know that anti-Judaism was prevalent. Now, in addition to the restrictions on Jewish life and religious practice that was set out by the Romans in their legal codes, Christians added laws that in the medieval period that further attempted to prohibit any sort of fraternization between Jews and Christians. These anti-Jewish laws are found in the codes of Constantine, Constantius, Theodosius II, and many of these laws persisted long after the collapse of the Roman Empire, making their way into the legal codes of European countries, okay? They also influenced Muslim legal codes. Now take a look at those anti-Jewish laws there on the right-hand side of the screen. Tell me in the chat box, do they remind you of laws from any other time period of history? Any thoughts on that? Do they look familiar? Yeah, Jim Crow. You got it, John. Jim Crow, Nuremberg, not coincidental. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Okay, great job. Okay, let's take a moment and look at another primary source. We're going to use art this time as a primary source, okay? What you see here are two statues. On the left is Ecclesia, whose name stems from the Greek word church or gathering. And on the right is a statue named Synagoga, whose name means synagogue. And they are a pair of figures personifying Christianity and Judaism during the medieval period, okay? So we're going to use a very similar strategy to the observe, reflect, and question strategy. This one is called See, Think, Wonder. This is a strategy you might be familiar with and use with your students. But let's use that same kind of restraint as we did earlier when we're doing observations and really just try to share what we see. And we're going to start with Ecclesia. She's the statue on the left-hand side. So in the chat box, go ahead and tell me what you see about Ecclesia only. Okay. She's got a cup or a holy grail, maybe. Her eyes are open. She has a cross, she's smiling, she's wearing a crown, she seems happy, looks beautiful, serene. Excellent. Love these comments. Keep them coming. Okay. Excellent. Love it. Love it. Now let's make, oh, she's curvy. Interesting. Let's make observations about synagogue. Oh, John, hold on. Before we do synagogue, I want to point out what John just said. Clothing is pure white. Ooh, interesting. I like that. Okay, let's go to synagogue. Blindfolded. Stripes on clothing. Convict stripes. Okay, hands not held up, right? They're down. Different posture, morose. Love it. Love it. Body posture more tense, slouching. Amazing observations. You're doing fantastic. I love this. Scroll is broken. Stick is broken. Great. Okay, now let's make some inferences. Okay, why the pure white clothing do we think on synagogue, on ecclesia? Why the pure white clothing, but yet the stripes on synagogue? Oh, angelic, holy, pure versus evil. Interesting. The purity or the of the church. I love it. Okay. Why the blindfold on synagogue? Why the blindfold on synagogue? Denies Christ, right? Blind faith. Cannot see the truth. Excellent. 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 All right. Now, are there any additional questions you have about these statues? Any additional questions you have that when you look at them, you wonder, or you maybe encourage your, okay, who made them? Okay, right. We know that these are found, these are circa 1300, and they are found at the Freiburg, Germany Cathedral entrance. Okay, now I'm going to try to answer a couple of your questions, right? So why the stripe pattern? So further research, right? Notice that that Ecclesia does have stripes on her cape, right? Notice how there are different patterns. Was this artist liberty, or was there a real reason behind that? Notice they're both wearing crowns. I'd wonder if we make associations of crowns being legal, why maybe are both wearing crowns, right? If one is perceived to be more negative than the other, okay? Some things that we've learned is that the broken bat in Synagogue's hand might be an allusion to the lance that stabbed Christ. The book slipping from her hands could be the Torah, reflective of prayer shawls, maybe. There you go. Excellent. So again, we just utilized another piece of a primary source to analyze this historical period of time. Now, as we continue to understand the form of religious anti-Semitism that we've been talking about, oh, interesting. I like that, Emily. That's a really good thought. Sorry, I got distracted from the comments there. I like that. I think it's important for us to note that in Italy and throughout Europe in the 13th century, Jews were marginalized. They were forced to live in separate areas of town. They were excluded from all activities in mainstream society. These areas were often gated and locked at night. Does this sound familiar, right? Take a look at that third bullet and the derivation of the word ghetto, right? It's believed to have come from the Italian word chiodo, meaning foundry, which is where the first Jewish quarter in Venice was located. It was near a foundry that once made cannons. So now it would be an amazing time to have a conversation with your students about the evolution of this term ghetto, where it started, and how it has evolved over time. And when we think about that term, how it has a very negative connotation and how that did not happen by accident, right? So there's a lot of conversation that can be brought back to making connections to your students so this learning feels relevant, which is so, so important. Now, church councils in the Middle Ages placed restrictions on the interactions between Christians and Jews. The Lateran Council, convened by Pope Innocent III, was just one example. Now, in 1215, in parts of Germany, all Jews were required to wear cone-shaped hats so that they wouldn't be mistaken for real Germans. And in other countries, they were required to wear yellow badges on their clothing to identify them as Jews. So this was 730 years before the Holocaust. Okay, so what we're starting to see here, those anti-Jewish laws, these sort of singling out physical markers, these are not ideas that Hitler necessarily invented. He may have perfected them, but he did not invent them. Okay, I love the conversation I'm seeing there in the chat about the statues, and that they've really elicited some conversation there. That's fantastic. All right, let's talk about that form of anti-Semitism, of economic anti-Semitism, and where the myth of Jews becoming greedy began to take root. So in the Middle Ages, right, there were very few career options that were open to Jews. And under the manorial system, Jews couldn't own land and farm. They weren't allowed to join the craft guilds. So there were very few things that they could do to earn a living. Working as traveling merchants or peddlers or jewelers, things that were portable, were among the very limited professions available to them. Now, usury or money lending with the collection of an extremely high interest was against Christian law. It was also against Jewish law, but desperate times call for desperate measures, right? And again, a good conversation to have with students about when do you make exemptions with your beliefs and morals if it is a matter of life or death, right? Conversations to have. So money lending, like I was saying, became an available profession for Jews, and they were often employed by feudal lords as tax or rent collectors. And, you know, as you can imagine, people disliked paying their taxes or owing money. Think about how you feel when you have to pay that mortgage every month, or your car payment, or that rent payment. It's not like you're just happily turning over that money, right? And this had to be done in person. And Jews were viewed as, you know, they were the scapegoats, they were the middle person. And so violence against Jews became very commonplace. And the stereotype of Jews being greedy began to take root here. Now, while the form of economic anti-Semitism evolved during the Middle Ages, religious anti-Judaism was still very prevalent. And an example of this widespread authority of the church and the religious fervor of the Middle Ages were the Crusades, right? And in 1096, Pope Urban II called for the liberation of Jerusalem, and Christian crusaders set off to free the Holy Land from the non-believing Muslims. Jews were victimized as these non-believers who lived en route to the Middle East. Okay. Now, the Middle Ages also led to an increased accusation of or myths that were rooted in religious prejudice against Jews. Now, since most peasants couldn't read, they were really dependent on the sermons from their clergy and visual images as well, to learn about their own religion and the non-believers. Art would often depict Jews as having horns, talons, forked tail. This association of the Jew and the devil was reinforced in sermons and in folk tales. And in an age of superstition, Jews were accused of black magic. And another popular anti-Jewish myth at the time was that of blood libel. So if a child went missing, it was often a Jew that was to blame. There was the rumor that Jews needed the blood of a Christian child to mix into their preparation of matzah for Passover. And of course, this was completely untrue. Yet, and this might have been discussed in the last couple of days, the blood libel accusations have have recently resurfaced, as recent as the last couple of years. Now, Jews were also accused of spreading the Black Plague, right? It was thought that they were poisoning wells because they were not dying at the same rate as their Christian neighbors, okay? So why logically, though? There's a scientific and logical explanation as to why the Jews weren't dying at the same rate as their Christian neighbors. Anyone want to take a stab at that in the chat box? Okay. So they had their kosher dietary laws and their ritualistic hygiene laws for sure. But remember, they were segregated. They were kept in locked areas of town. So here you have an example of the first evidence of quarantining, right? And how that, again, could be a really good conversation. Exactly, Stephanie, forced quarantine, a really great opportunity to make connections so that this seems relevant to your students, okay? But of course, Jews were seen as scapegoats. They had to be the reason that all of these Christians were dying from the plague, and that it obviously had to be that they were poisoning the well. Stephen, I just have to jump in for a second. So we started a little bit late due to technical difficulties and things like that. Is it okay if I go over 2 o'clock just a little bit?
Yes.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, not too long, I promise. Now, anti-Jewish prejudices resulted in Jews being expelled from most areas in Europe during a period of over 500 years. Jews were driven from their homes, and they mainly fled eastward to the more tolerant kingdom of Poland, Lithuania. There, the rulers promised Jews their safety and allowed them to work and travel and practice their religion freely. And you may notice that many Jews settled also in the Ottoman Empire, which is the setting of the Arab-Israeli conflict, which I had shared as one of our curriculum and our online course as well. Now, by the middle of the 16th century, 80% of the world's Jews lived in Poland. And at the start of World War II, the population of Poland was approximately 15% Jewish, with cities like Warsaw being 30% Jewish, Krakow being 25% Jewish. Obviously, these statistics are important because it's showing where the concentrated population of Jews were located and why Hitler sort of implemented the camps and all of the atrocities for the most part, you know, at the largest quantities were held in Poland because of where most of where the camps were. Exactly, John, you got it. You made the connection. Now, in 1517, Martin Luther, who was a Roman Catholic monk in Germany, attacked the Pope and the corruption within the Catholic Church, and he began a Protestant Reformation. He hoped that the tolerance that he was showing would persuade Jews to convert. When they didn't, and they did not adopt his form of Reformation, he lashed out against Jews in his 1543 treatise called Concerning the Jews and Their Lies. And he asked the question, what then shall we Christians do with this damned, rejected race of Jews? And you can see many of his suggested solutions there on the screen. Now, his views were not original, and they represented much of Christian thought at this point in time. Now, however, by the mid-1800s, many Western and Central European Jews enjoyed the freedoms that were brought about by emancipation. Again, another great time to pause and break down the understanding of the term emancipation with your students and what it means in association to that term we have here in American history, and make some connections to the similarities and of course the differences as well. But again, a great time again to make connections and make this learning relevant to your students. So because of this newfound emancipation, many expected that Jews would give up their religion and adopt the lifestyle of the majority of the population and in effect stop being Jewish. But of course, most Jews did not give up their beliefs or their traditional Jewish ways of life. And many saw this as a rejection of modern ways by a stubborn people, especially since Jews were now free to leave the ghettos. They were allowed to live and work alongside their non-Jewish neighbors. So this threat of infiltration by these unwanted foreigners were starting to create some more challenges for the Jews who have become emancipated. So we're going to talk a little bit about this through the form of political anti-Semitism and economic anti-Semitism. So due to this emancipation of Jews, European anti-Semitism shifted from a religious form to a more secular political form. So new nationalist ideologies across Europe that were brought on by the French Revolution just further justified this resentment towards Jews by identifying them as unwanted foreigners, as I was saying earlier. And especially since many Jews from rural areas of former Poland, which is now at this time part of the Russian Empire, were migrating west to seek greater economic and educational opportunities, right? Again, this threat of now having to share a piece of the pie, the pieces start to get a little smaller, and there's this feeling of a threat, right? So keep that in mind. Now, this is a political cartoon, one of my favorite types of primary sources. And it's an example of the growing political anti-Semitism in Europe at the time. So it features Berlin court preacher Adolf Stoker, who is one of the earliest activists of the anti-Semitic movement in a similar pose of Martin Luther, posting his 95 thesis on the door of a synagogue. And although he was a theologian, he campaigned against Jews primarily on social issues. And immediately after his first anti-Semitic speech and the foundation of the Christian Social Party, the Weekly Klatterdash, which was a local German publication, published this cartoon. And on it, you only see the phrase "hep hep," which was the battle cry of early anti-Semitic riots in 1819 Germania. This is another political cartoon showing the growing political anti-Semitism. It's from 1903 from a German weekly satirical magazine called Simplicissimus. And it shows a Russian immigrant transforming himself from a poor ragman into a member of elite society. And anti-Semites saw the energy in which Jews made the most of the opportunities offered to them by European society as a threat to their traditional values, okay? Here's the Dreyfus case we were talking about earlier. Now, France was the first European country to emancipate the Jews in 1791, guaranteeing them equality of all its citizens, regardless of their religion. And of course, to Jews, this meant full citizenship without any conditions. But in 1894, Captain Alfred Dreyfus, a Jewish officer in the French army, was falsely accused and convicted of treason. And although Dreyfus was later exonerated, the fact that he was convicted, right, revealed a reality that there was a significant sector of the French population that was concerned with Jews in power. And they were willing to believe, right, that Jews like Dreyfus were likely all traitors, right? And this case right here was the impetus for Theodor Herzl's declaration for the need of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. And I'm so glad, Anna, that you pointed, or Anna, I'm sorry, pointed out the serpent, right? So this image, similar to that cover image we saw earlier, and you'll see will also be similar to some other images in just a minute, very common and absolutely represents a theme. You got it. Okay, I'm going to start to wrap up a little bit here. I know, just give me a little bit more time. I apologize for starting a little late, but I think that what we're about to wrap up with is really, really important. So, while in Western and Central European states, including England, Italy, of course, France, Jews became emancipated. This did not happen in Imperial Russia, where most of the European Jewish population lived. So the Tsarist government forced Jews also to settle in a certain area of Russia, the Pale, right? The Pale of Settlement. And here in the areas Russia had taken over after the division of Poland, most Jews lived in great poverty. They were cramped into towns, often making up the only inhabitants of that area. And there was a very small amount of Jewish upper class that were allowed to live in Moscow or St. Petersburg. Now also, right, the living conditions in Russia for the general population was also appalling. So during the reigns of Alexander III and Nicholas II, as a means to divert the popular discontent at the appalling living conditions and the autocratic control, Russian authorities actually encouraged anti-Semitic violence. And so many anti-Jewish riots or pogroms took place during the next 3 decades, okay? And it wasn't actually until the Russian Revolution ended Tsarist rule that Jews actually became emancipated in Russia. Again, here are those images that we just talked about. Nicholas II's power over his empire was fading as, revolutionary groups were plotting to overthrow him. And in 1905, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion was written. And it was said to be a secret plan of a group of powerful Jews for plotting the collapse of all Christian countries and bringing about Jewish world domination, right? So again, that similar image of a serpent controlling the world. What we know is the book was a clever forgery by a Russian secret police who intended to make it look as if revolutionaries who wanted to overthrow the Tsar were controlled by Jews. Now, Henry Ford of the Ford Motor Company, again, making that connection with your students, right? He brought the Protocols of the Elders of Zion to the United States. He had it translated in English in his newspaper, the Dearborn Independent, and he accused the Jews of using communism, banking, unions, gambling, even jazz music as a means to weaken the American people and their country. So the protocols, right, made it look as if the revolutionaries who wanted to overthrow the Tsar were controlled by the Jews. Many Jews who supported the revolution in 1917 were socialists who took control of Russia under the leadership of Lenin in October of 1917. Now, anti-Semites, especially in Germany, made a great big deal about the fact that Lenin's second in command was Leon Trotsky, who happened to be Jewish. Now, just as in the Middle Ages, Jews were wrongfully blamed for the Black Death, now in the 20th century, Jews are being blamed for this new plague that was sweeping Europe, communism, right? This is an illustration, a 1919 postcard that shows a caricature Jew stabbing the German army in the back with a dagger. The surrender in 1918 was blamed on the unpatriotics, right? The socialists, the Bolsheviks, the Republicans, and especially the Jews, right? Because the devastation of Germany's defeat in World War I and the fear of the communist revolution that really fueled mass discontent within the Weimar Republic and the multi-party system. This radicalized the pre-existing right-wing anti-Semitic parties and gave rise to the Nazi Party. Interestingly, many Germans blamed the Jews for Germany's loss in the war, ignoring the fact that a higher percentage of German Jews fought in World War I than any other ethnic, religious, or political group in Germany. Some 12,000 German Jews died for their country in World War I. Exactly, Sanford, you got it. Now, wrapping up, okay, promise. We're going to our last form of anti-Semitism, racial anti-Semitism. In 1859, Charles Darwin published the book, The Origin of the Species, in which he said that all life on Earth had evolved over millions of years, right? Some people misused, if you will, Darwin's idea to claim that humans had evolved into distinct groups or races, and at the top of these groups were the white Europeans or Aryan race, and that the Jews were a separate Semitic race. For those that were obsessed with the Jewish problem, the idea of a Semitic race meant that Jews were born different from other people, and therefore they could never become part of mainstream society. William Marr, we talked about him earlier, right? He kind of coined the term anti-Semitism. He and his fellow anti-Semites did not believe that a person stopped being Jewish if they converted from Christianity. For them, Jews would be members of the so-called Semitic race, whatever their religion. So the hatred of Jews for religious reasons was now joined by a new idea that Jewish people were an inferior race. And the only solution to this Jewish question, anti-Semites would then argue, was for them to leave Europe. Here are examples of that scientific anti-Semitism. I use it in air quotes because it was not and it is not real, right? It's based on scientific racism or the pseudo-scientific belief that there's evidence that exists to support or justify racism. We know that that is completely untrue. Proponents of this use a number of different disciplines within the sciences, like anthropology, to categorize people by their physical characteristics, such as their skull shape, facial attributes, body types, right? And this is where we get those physical stereotypes. These are photographs from the Nazi period comparing Aryan noses to Semitic noses. That is a page from The Poisonous Mushroom. I saw someone mention that earlier, right? It's a children's book from the Nazi period where the child is at the board saying that the number 6 is bent and it looks like a Jewish nose, right? All right, here we go. We're gonna wrap up here with Hitler, believing in all the lies that had ever been said about Jewish people since the beginning of early Christianity. He believed that the Jews were the greatest threat to the so-called Aryan race, and that either the German people would defeat the Jewish race or be destroyed by what he saw as a Jewish communist menace. And in his book, Mein Kampf, he reveals how much he had been taken in by the lies that he read in the protocols, and that once people read the book, the Jewish menace would be broken, right? The Nazi Party gained strength through the late 1920s into the 1930s, taking advantage of Germany's poor economic situation and their lack of experience with parliamentary democracy. He was appointed Chancellor of Germany in January of 1933, dismantling the Weimar Republic and implementing his anti-Semitic program, right? Starting with the boycott of Jewish businesses in April of 1933, which really was a symbol that marked the beginning of a nationwide campaign by the Nazi Party against Jews in Germany that would ultimately culminate in the Holocaust. He implemented the Nuremberg laws in 1935 that were meant to exclude German Jews from Reich citizenship, and added his supplemental laws throughout the 1930s, right? Many of these are reminiscent of anti-Semitic actions or policies of previous centuries, like we saw with the anti-Judaism laws, and we mentioned the connection to the Jim Crow laws. But why does it say to be continued at the bottom? Because this is where our timeline of events ends. As I mentioned, we stop at the onset of the Holocaust and World War II because you have been given so many amazing resources and tools to teach that part of the story. But it's my hope that through the information that I shared today, you now have the resources to help you answer your students' questions. Where did anti-Semitism come from? How did the Holocaust happen? So really quickly, I just want to point out some engaging ways on our website that you can utilize primary sources to teach your students this topic. You will find all of these things, including a teacher slide deck, on our website. Thank you so much for these wonderful, wonderful, wonderful feedback in the chat box there. I am going to put a link, if you could take, well, 2 links. The first is to the sessions resources, as I promised that I would. Let me show you what that looks like really quickly. Hopefully y'all just got that. And if for some reason you have any trouble with it, Stephen can get that to you. But this is what, and then here is my email address as that pulls up. Hang on. In case you need me or want to connect for future PD, there is my email address. Here are all the resources that we touched on or are related to today's topic to help you teach this topic with your students. And it's all in this one location for you to easily access. I end with, of course, huge thank yous to all of you for being so engaged and participatory today. I'm going to ask one last favor of you to complete our very brief evaluation. I'm sure you're doing one for the program today, but we also really do rely on your feedback. It's how we ensure we're doing the best that we can for you all. And I want to thank again Stephen and the Holocaust Center. Thank you so much for having me today. It's been an honor and a privilege learning with you all. If you're on social media, follow us on Facebook and on Instagram. I'm always adding some interesting information and ways to connect with us, to learn more with us. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dori.
We went over time and I apologize. Thank you for giving me that grace in that period of time. Thank you so much.
Okay, they just don't have to listen to me anymore because that was my session. So we're all good.
Oh, good. I'm sorry, Stephen.
Yeah, that's okay because no, I don't think anyone wants to stay late on the Friday unless ever I could keep them, but I've kept them late every day today. Everyone has had to stay till like 3:30 every day, and I promised them 3, so I will try not to be that person. Okay. But I will reach back out to you, everyone. I feel like a round of applause for our wonderful speaker.
Could I, by any chance, get everyone to turn their camera on and I could take a quick picture? Would that be okay?
Some people don't have cameras, and some people may be driving. Lord knows what. I'm just curious. So, but everyone here, hopefully you can see the audience here, so they can all. You have to look this way because this is where the camera is. I know everyone wants to look at the screen, but
let's on the count of 3 say, "Learning rocks." Okay, ready? On the count of 3. 1,
wow.
2, 3.
Learning rocks.
Amazing. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have
everyone,
a safe weekend. Happy summer.
Thank you so much. Everyone who's online, go ahead. We're going to go to the next session. I'm going to close out the Zoom. Thank you so much, Dori, for being with us. And we'll just going to go right into the next session so we can actually begin to wrap things up. It'll be kind of part of the closing session. So we're going to close out here.